What's going on, guys? Let me establish a few things before I get into the meat and potatoes of this video. The first thing is that why put the boxing voice in this video? People might ask, well, is it because you used to work for them or work with them, be a co-host on the podcast? Is it for that purpose? No, the purpose for me doing that is when I'm using these quotes, specifically these quotes. It's from ThaBoxingVoice. So in other words, I'm giving them credit. Credit necessarily doesn't like praise people. It's just where their quotes came from, where the source came from. In fact, I will actually link the video, put a link on this video on the bottom of my YouTube page. So if you guys want to see the video in its entirety, right, you guys could check that out. I'll even timestamp that for you guys. And the second thing is that where my criticism comes from, and I will criticize a lot of things that went on in this interview and things about just in general. You guys will hear more constructed. I have never once told people not to pay for their Patreon services, not to subscribe to them, not to support them. Like I said, it's a free market. You guys could do whatever you guys want to do, right? Me criticizing something has nothing to do with my intention on taking people's food out of their mouth, right? I don't fucking like Rachel Maddow, but I'm not going to go on a campaign and tell people to not watch your show because it's not my problem. I'm not worried about other people's success and not success. It's not my goal. Unlike a lot of people on the other side, even people on the show, for example, have said things like, where Paulie has said something that's borderline insensitive or Islamophobic or whatever, and they've actually added his network questioning why she should be employed, right? Hypocritical, obviously, but I'm not a coward like this guy specifically is, right? So, Wilder. Let me start, I guess, in the beginning of where these quotes and the context came to about, right? So, obviously, everybody heard in the news or just on Twitter that Eddie Hearn offered Wilder an alleged $3 million to fight Dillian White, who is kind of, reemerged as at least a popular figure with some of his recent fights after losing, of course, in a fight where he did well in certain aspects against AJ, only to be stopped, obviously, stopped brutally. But having said that, so Eddie Hearn sent an offer to Wilder. Wilder, I guess, didn't respond for a little while. Then Dillian White went on social media, was talking shit, calling him, a pussy and a coward not to respond. Then Wilder comes back and told the amount that was offered to him, said that was disrespectful, said that if you want to see me, pay me $7 million, Eddie Hearn, because I guess Charles Martin got paid $5 million or $6 million. It's irrelevant, but whatever they paid Charles Martin for the IBF belt, especially because he's the WBC belt and he's the champion for a much longer time, so he should get paid $7 million. That was his, I guess, take. First and foremost, last time I checked, Dillian White is not the Olympic gold winner. He's not the cash cow. And he's not the face of boxing in the UK as is AJ. So yes, they overpaid Charles Martin for that belt. But we're not even having this conversation because essentially you're not fighting AJ. Now, if they offered him $3 million to fight AJ, yes, of course he should get paid more than $3 million to fight AJ. He has the WBC belt. AJ will be making millions upon millions, and I'm pretty sure Eddie Hearn would offer him $10 million, whatever, to fight him. But you're talking about a much lower risk fight. You're talking about a guy who would set you up for that big financial payday, and we're talking about a guy who was knocked out, besides having some success against AJ. So it's a less risk of a fight. He's a less name, so don't equate the two. That's first and foremost. Secondly, right, people go, well, that $3 million seems a bit low, and I could agree to an extent that that's fair. But what you do is you if you really want to make the fight, And $3 million is a good payday for Wilder in the first place, because I'm pretty sure that he hasn't been paid much more than $1 million or even $1 million for a fight, which is the kind of what, like, the same people who argue that he's not being paid enough use that type of logic. So I'm going to use that logic just for a second. That you counter kind of how Eddie Hearn did through Lou DiBella or Al Heyman or whoever is involved in the financial aspect of this. Instead of price yourself out to say $7 million, because that is ridiculous for this type of fight. Counter maybe say $4 million. Be reasonable. Get this fight because you want this fight. This is a good fight for you if you think you could win. If you think it's going to set up big fights for you with with eventually Anthony Joshua, which is the big fight that everybody wants to see down the road. But again, Wilder has to do something relevant to put himself in the position to maximize himself as a fighter, to get that Wilder huge mega fight in the UK, right? So let me then go up into the interview last night that was on the Boxing Voice, and somebody tell me to listen to this interview and my thoughts on it. And I did, because I wanted to hear what their take was. The video was titled that Wilder countered with 7 million. Something like Wilder countered with 7 million, which kind of is fair, but it kind of like what they were justifying the amount of money it being fair and not fair because the Charles Martin aspect of it, right? They weren't factoring into these other things, but I'll get more into that, but I want to go more into, I guess, the title of this video, and a question that I have for you guys is verbally threatening to kill somebody in a ring going too far? Is that different than, I guess, saying certain things that may be offensive, whether it's homophobic, racist, sexist, Islamophobic, etc., right? But it's threatening to kill somebody too far. And in my opinion, it is, right? So I'm consistent, right? I'm consistent. I don't care what anybody says. I like it. I'm not politically correct. I don't think that fighters should be held to the same standard like a politician should. I don't think fighters should be held to the same standards as a school teacher is. I think fighters are fighters. They're in a violent sport. They're in a risky sport. And it's their choice if they want to be a role model for people or not. I mean, Tyson Fury, he could say whatever he wants to say, right? Tyson Fury said some things that people would assume that would offend me. But I don't care if Tyson Fury says anything offensive, because I'm consistent with it, right? Just like I didn't criticize Angel Garcia for using the N-word with an A after it, where everybody knows that Puerto Rican Americans, whether you agree with it or not, and largely have been allowed to use that word. He used it in a place where, on a platform, and people blew up at this. So I'm just saying, like, but I think that in a sport that people die, and people die almost every month, I would say. I mean, it's irregular. Like, we had Tim Hague, an MMA fighter, just pass away in the ring. He shouldn't have been fighting, but it could happen. Yes, and people have known that I sat ringside at the Pritchard Colon fight, and it did kind of change my outlook a lot on life. And let me say this, because largely is that I was always frustrated that fighters should be, I always had the mindset in the back of my mind, fighters, the best should fight the best. But then the people go, well, they need the amount of money, they need the proper amount of money to pay their family, because there's always a risk of this happening. And I agree. So, but I'm consistent, because then you shouldn't be able to mock killing somebody. So one question, in this interview, one question about the offer and Eddie Hearns. Here's a quote from Wilder, right? And this is on the Boxing Voice, and I'm going to read the quote from the actual quote. "I'm on some kill a man in the ring type stuff. I'm not playing around," end quote, right? He goes further to one question about Stavern. "If I got Stavern," I'm quoting, if I got Stavern in the ring again, I'm going to kill." He continues, first time the doctor said it was an inch to his life. Second time, I'm going to finish the job. Right? And when further talking about his demeanor and his I guess, when his demeanor and his, I guess, prerogative in the ring that people know, he's referring to what people know. He goes, he says that, my handwriting's so shitty, but I'm on some, okay, good. This is what he was referring to, like, that when people know him, when they look into his eyes, he goes, quote, I'm on some see your family no more type shit, right? So these are some of the quotes from Wilder. Now, having said that, I think it's a different type of thing. Oh, but he goes further on to quote, like, to justify his street credentials, I guess, in the UK, that he has some people in the UK that will quote, take care of, come to your place and take care of business, end quote, to just, I guess, establish the fact that no matter what, no matter where he is, he has people that would commit felonies for him. I guess he thinks he's Michael Corleone or some shit, but that's irrelevant. That's hearsay. That's not as big of a deal to me, because, but it will. But when I continue explaining it, it will be. So now, I don't. You could say anything you want, right? Like, you could say things like, I mean, it could be so offensive. You could say things like, I'm gonna beat his ass so badly, make him look like such a coward, his wife won't want to fuck him anymore. Very offensive, right? But you're not threatening to kill somebody. You're not crossing the line. And I think the line is that when you're threatening to kill, not put somebody in the hospital, which is borderline, but threatening to kill somebody, I think that in a sport that where people die, I think that it crosses the line. It really does, especially in the sense that these are human beings, and if you care about a human being getting paid, like if you're saying Wilder should be paid this amount of money, you should also then assume that the other man is a human being as well, and you would like him to afford to feed his family, yet be there for his family as well, right? So that's kind of like very hypocritical. Now, having said all these things, I saw two men last night, sit there and not say one fucking thing about that, right? In fact, Matthew, the quote hipster hunter, right? The man who added Showtime and was asking why do they hire him, because he says Islamic phobic things, trying to get Paulie fired for being offensive, right? After Wilder said all this shit, he then continues to be his politically correct self, afraid of Wilder's, I guess, reaction, or stand up for himself and be a real journalist. Because when he looks back on this, as a liberal, as someone who cares about fighters, he would have sat there and listened to a guy continuously talk about killing fighters and not say shit. He asks Deontay Wilder, how do you feel about Tyson Fury calling Anthony Joshua an Uncle Tom? Who gives a fuck? Like, seriously, who gives a fuck? Like, that's my opinion. Who gives a fuck? So it just makes no sense. But my thing is that this man gets a free ride from people like this, thus making your product become a propaganda machine. Now, to another reason, again, why I take some of these threats personally, is because is because Deontay Wilder has contacted people straight up via text message, via interaction, has referred to me, right, because I was previous on the Boxing Voice, has referred to me as that dumb white boy, right? So I'm gonna refer to myself as the white boy in this thing, right? I don't know shit about boxing, and he said these things that, he don't know shit about boxing, but he's invited to come to my camp anytime, and I'll show him what the deal is, right? Now, here's the thing, right? He said it on multiple occasions to this one individual, and I do take that as a legitimate threat. Why? Because if Deontay Wilder is willing to hit a woman and is willing to beat a man in front of kids and wife, he for sure would put hands on an outspoken, opinionated, often I'm an asshole sometimes, white boy he would have no problem putting hands on me. And I don't act like I'm this like fucking above the, like that to me is a legitimate threat. Well, yes, it doesn't sound soothing to me. So the fact that he and I've never crossed the line as far as warranting some type of threat. I've never threatened I've never talked bad about his family, right? His family. I've never talked bad about his character, other than his actions, right? I don't know what's in his heart. I don't judge people based on that. I just view people based on their action. And his actions do speak louder than his words. Now, and I feel like most of my criticism for Wilder has been fair, right? Has been very fair. That he has one solid win, and he hasn't fought a top 10 guy in over 2 years, which was how he won his belt. And yes, I was impressed in that one fight that he had against Tavern. But having said that, having done that since then, if you're calling yourself the champ, right, you need to do more. Otherwise, you're just another guy with a belt, despite you having the belt. A belt that he won off, I guess, he won off Severn, which came from Vitaly, who retired, right, because he was no longer boxing, and he was going to be the mayor of Ukraine. I mean, Kiev, to be specifically, in Ukraine. So, and further in the interview, right, and I will give him credit for doing one follow-up thing about how, the $7 million, or I guess the $3 million, are comparing him to, Ness did say that comparing it to Wilder, comparing the amount of money that Eddie Hearn offered to for White is not, you shouldn't be the same as AJ, because of, they're different fighters. He went on to say something like, he kind of like said like he gets that, but then he like diffuses it and like, I'm the champ. I could have asked for $10 million. It's dictated. Then he also insinuated like he said he'll go to the UK. In other words, like he kind of questioned it, but it wasn't like 100% hard. Like it wasn't 100% hard. Before this, he was justifying him asking this amount of money, right? And it's a damn shame. And I think that not enough people are honest about who this man. They're not honest about Wilder, because immediately if you criticize Wilder, you're viewed as a hater. You're viewed as someone who doesn't want to support an American boxer, and you're viewed as racist. All of those things are given if you're criticizing Wilder, right? But my thing is that it has nothing to do with that. And I think people need to start having principles. And I encourage people on the Boxing Voice, too, to start having some type of principles, right? To start having some type of consistency. If they ever want their product to grow, right? And to be honest, it has not grown at all since I've left. In fact, they've lost a lot of viewers. And let me establish again that I won't go into the details about the specific things, but I was criticized often for me saying offensive things that offended people. Maybe offended Wilder. I'm sure, everybody knows that I would not let fighters get away with saying things like that, because I want to ask good questions and invoke emotion upon it. But having some type of consistency and morality it's essential. It's essential. So if you are criticizing fighters for using offensive dialogue, right? Using homophobic slurs, calling another boxer a faggot, telling another being racially insensitive, etc., right? For example, Kovalev. Kovalev was this demon, this racist, this animal, because he said racist things about Andre Ward. I think you should be offended when a boxer is talking about killing somebody, right? These are threats. These are actual threats, not just offensive language, right? Boxer who has also threatened people outside the ring and has actually attacked people outside the ring, right? Additionally, I think if you're talking about he needs to, quote-unquote, get paid what he's deserved, unquote, I think you also have to have some compassion for the other fighter when in regards to this type of vitriolic dialogue and never seeing his family again, right? I think shit talking's amazing. I love it. Just be creative. But like I said, my line is where somebody talks about killing somebody, and is not playing about it, right? It's not hurting somebody. This is not saying like, I'm gonna beat the fucking manhood out of him. I'm gonna embarrass him. You know, and even going further and saying blatantly racist, sexist, homophobic, Islamophobic things, right? So I think boxing needs to, in the media, right? I don't know what they should do specifically about this. Like, I'm not going to say one way or the other, but I think if there needs to be some type of line, right? Some type of line, it is, or some type of precedent set, is that in a sport where people die, I think it is, for sure, I guess it's essential for the media, for the commissions, if they want to be considered to have any type of integrity, to put their foot down there and say, either say, this is not appropriate. If you continue this type of talk, we will fine you, take your belt away. I don't know exactly what the thing is. And for journalists to question people for saying that, right? That's what offended me the most, and surprised me the most. And people weren't being as hard on that, is that they're letting this man who's put hands on women, who's put hands on people in front of women and children, to say this type of shit, yet they are critical for anything else. It just behooves me. And again, I'll come out with more videos later today. I will probably and most likely put the link of the video of the Boxing Voice for this, if you guys want to hear the audio yourself. I'm not trying to, I guess,